A lot of Metroid Prime games headed to Nintendo Switch 1 and 2 may have just leaked online early, and we may even have some exact marketing dates tied to the reveals or launches of these said projects in plain sight right now as we speak. However, I would like to say as a big asterisk at the beginning of this entire video that while I in general put a lot of faith in the source we will be discussing revealing this information today, I also am in the mindset that the most likely venue to see Prime 2 and 3 and some potential other projects that we're going to talk about come over and get announced for the Switch family of systems would have been at the most recent September Nintendo Direct. And clearly, while we got the December 4th launch date of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, we had no such announcement of any kind of Prime 2 or 3 or other games we will mention being in the pipeline for Nintendo releases. And there's one potential hope for that to change. It's kind of a Hail Mary last second play, maybe possibly out of left field. Nintendo announces this kind of presentation when these games would drop and be revealed, but again, I am erring on the side of caution with my own expectations and maybe not putting quite as much stock into this information, at least in the form that many people would expect to see these games released in, as there is another way this information could prove true, but it may not be tied to the lead into Prime 4's marketing like we would ideally want to see it be a part of, meaning we can play a lot of these Prime games in the lead up to Prime 4's release. But there's a ton of different information to break down. We're going to dive into all of it right now. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And the source in question is none other than Nash Weedle. And you might remember, we won't go through a whole recap history of things they've gotten right in recent memory, but in the Switch 2 generation and even towards the end of the Switch 1, lots of things coming true that they were the only source talking about. Mario and Luigi before Brothership was announced, Donkey Kong Bonanza when everybody was expecting 3D Mario, Elden Ring Tarnished Edition for Switch 2, Virtual Boy coming to NSO, believe it or not, a new Yoshi game being in development, and many more. But they have put out so much different information from presumably different sources that naturally their track record is not perfect, and keep that in mind when we are going through this information. But recently, Nash recorded a video over on his YouTube channel that I will have linked in the description down below, where he basically puts out that he has heard from a source that every Metroid Prime game will be brought over to Nintendo Switch. And in the video, at least according to the translation, he does say Nintendo Switch. He does not specify if this is Switch 1 or 2. And in my mind, we might only see some of these playable on Switch 2 if they release in the way that I am thinking they possibly could release. But we are talking about not just Metroid Prime 1 Remastered that we already have, but also Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, Metroid Prime Pinball, and even Metroid Prime Hunters. Now, this would have to be either some kind of ultimate Metroid Prime collection pack that Nintendo would throw all together, so kind of a Metroid Prime trilogy plus, if you will, and or this could be valid info, but they are coming over slowly and Nintendo will actually trickle these out as individual releases over the course of time. And the second idea of how we could see these games come over, that would kind of support that trickle release, which you guys can probably guess where I'm going with it. But let's entertain the idea first that this is good information and that Switch 1 and Switch 2 are going to get these games, these Metroid Prime games, in terms of a collection. Now, there is an interesting track record with Nintendo promoting new releases in a franchise by bringing over the previous numbered games that have not been out yet, and even with a very quick turnaround. Because while we look at the release date of December 4th for Metroid Prime 4 and think maybe it's too late for some kind of Prime 2 and 3 announcement since it wasn't at the September Direct, well, I would like to take you back to the Pikmin 1 and 2 HD reveal and launch time, because in the lead up to Pikmin 4's July 21st, 2023 release, we saw at the June Direct held on June 21st that Pikmin 1 and 2 HD digital would actually be out that day of the event. Legitimately 1 month before the release of Pikmin 4, we got a shadow drop announcement that 2 and 3 would be headed to Nintendo Switch, and there would be a physical edition out September 22nd later in the year. So the physical release did indeed miss the launch time of Pikmin 4, but Nintendo at least put them out digitally for fans to play in the lead up to Pikmin 4's release. And mind you, Pikmin 3 Deluxe was already out on Nintendo Switch, so you had the whole numbered franchise up to 4 playable before Pikmin 4's ultimate release. So Nintendo has dropped games in the last hour in the lead up to a numbered release previously, and Metroid Prime 1 Remastered was another game that we had in the rumor mill speculation talk from sources like Jeff Grubb and Nate the Hate as far back as maybe late 2020, at least 2021 we were talking about that game, and it took all the way until February 8th, 2023 to see that game finally come to fruition. And the rumor at the time was that Prime 1 was getting a more big boy, quote unquote, remaster with enhanced lightings, textures, visuals, and all of that, while Prime 2 and 3 would get something of a more simplified HD port. And if you look at Pikmin 1 and 2 HD, that is more or less what I am envisioning for those games: a simple up-res of the texture to 4K quality for the Switch 2 edition, 1080p for the Switch 1, and you have native widescreen support and some quality of life enhancements, such as the additional aiming options for the analog controls, or you can put them back to their original style of controls from the GameCube, where you stop with the trigger button to look around and aim, and or they may actually even include motion controls for both of them, like we've seen them do for Prime 1 Remastered. Basically the Prime 1 controller suite, but a little bit more of a simplified visual upscaling job when it comes to how the games look, like not totally rebuilt like Metroid Prime 1. So where might Nintendo announce these games now that the September Direct, and likely the last mainline Direct for the rest of the year, has come and gone? Well, one thing we have seen in the Nintendo Switch 2 generation so far is a big emphasis on game-specific directs, as we had one for the big launch title in Mario Kart World, we had one for the follow-up launch title the next month in Donkey Kong Bonanza, and we've gotten one of 2 so far for Kirby Air Riders. This is more tied to Sakurai and how he likes to communicate with his fans around a game's development cycle, because we already had literally a 45-minute focus direct, and now we're going to get another one that will be God knows how long. But Nintendo has not shied away from utilizing their direct branding to promote big games that they want to sell well in the Nintendo Switch 2 generation so far, and there is this idea floating around that Metroid Prime 4, especially when you look at the last trailer and realize there was no narration, it was relatively pretty quick outside of seeing some big new areas and seeing Samus on her bike and seeing a few different environments we had not seen previously. Like, there was really, all things considered, it was a pretty quick trailer, and they just moved along, dropped the date, and they haven't done anything else to market the game since then. And naturally, you would assume that Nintendo does have quite a bit to show off about this game still, and they may choose to do that in a 15 to 20 minute dedicated direct presentation. And if we do see something like that announced at some point in this month or next month, that would be the last chance type of venue that Prime 2 and 3 could show up in the lead up to Prime 4's release. Now, some dates that are interesting that could be hinting towards some kind of release time for these presumed projects. Well, we have that Metroid Prime retrospective book that covers all 3 games and the development of them in detail, that was originally scheduled to launch on June 24th this year. It was then announced that it was delayed until October 28th. And was the book delayed because they actually needed more time with something that went on with the print and release of that? Or did they want to have it released closer to the actual launch of something like a Prime 2 and 3 game and be closer to the launch of Prime 4? And would these other 2 games just be ready to go and waiting for Prime 4 to ultimately be ready to drop on December 4th? And back when we saw the 2025 date for Prime 4, it very well could have been in the plan to originally launch it as something like a September title, but Retro just needed more time to polish the game up and finish up some last minute things. That is very much a possibility. Now then we have some amiibo dates to look forward to, and while the Silex amiibo is out on the Metroid Prime 4 Beyond launch date of December 4th, we are interestingly seeing the Samus and Samus with Viola amiibo launched on November 6th, which is also a Thursday, which is when Nintendo historically drops their first party software. And if there was a date exactly 1 month before, similar to Pikmin, that might make sense for Prime 2 and 3 to be there, that would probably be the date. And this is just speculation. It's not tied to Nash's info, but when he's talking about all those games making it over to Switch, and again, I don't know how they would do Prime Hunters and Prime Pinball. They're DS games. They could probably just adapt them to be playable, no problem, with some work on the Switch 1 and 2. But assuming that info is correct and it's actually part of the Prime 4 Beyond's marketing cycle, this would be the one way that I could see that checking out, and Nintendo would indeed utilize all these Prime games for fans of the franchise overall, just to go pick up everything in one major release in the lead up to Prime 4. It is a possibility. It is a way for them to maybe package it as a Metroid Prime trilogy or Metroid Prime anthology, if you will, all the Prime games together in one package, and kind of get you to double dip on Prime Remastered that was now out for a while. If they sold this at a $70 price point and it had every Prime game baked into it for that, that might be one way we see Nintendo go about this. And then you can pick them up individually for less money, where Prime 1 stays at $40, but we get Prime 2 and 3 standalone for $20 each, and Prime Pinball and Hunters for $10 or $20 each. Nintendo could do something like this, and it's not totally out of their character to do something like this in the modern day. That said, and this is one of the kind of conversational shifts I want to take you on, and a little bit more where my mindset is, just to be on the safe side about this, because I definitely want Prime 2 and 3 playable in the lead up to 4. But let's assume that's not good info, and Nash has this one wrong in terms of them coming to Switch 1. One other alternative is that these games could indeed be in the pipeline, but for Nintendo Switch Online. And what is available right now on the Switch 2 Online, the GameCube, what is not available but could presumably come at some point, the DS, and eventually, no doubt, we will see the Wii supported as well. The problem with the NSO idea is that it seems like it would be quite a ways before we learned about Wii and DS games being supported on Nintendo Switch 2. These also wouldn't be headed to Nintendo Switch 1 at all if it is an NSO release pattern, but it is one that I think Nintendo may ultimately do. But I also like the chances of the fact that they did not add in Prime 2 to the GameCube library of games yet, when that would have been an easy one to slot in there if you weren't doing anything else with it as one of the earlier GameCube launch titles. And since they didn't do that, I do actually think that there's a reason to maybe hold on some hope that they're doing something else with that game and don't want it in the service just yet, because Prime 2 being an NSO on GameCube in the lead up to Prime 4 just makes a lot of sense, but it's not there and it's not even on the roadmap. So while I do think long term this info of all the Prime games being on Nintendo Switch 2 would check out as part of NSO, it's also not really matching the timing of Nash revealing this, and it's not even matching the reference to the system that he named in this supposed leak express. So who knows at this point? We do have one glimmer of hope left to see some Prime games hit Nintendo Switch before Prime 4 is ultimately out on December 4th. But obviously, as each day goes by and we don't learn about some kind of Prime 4 Direct, the chances get lower and lower. But I do think that Nintendo would likely wait until a little before a month and a half before the game is out to have that Prime 4 Direct. And they may well indeed shadow drop the rest of the Prime games there if they are indeed in the pipeline as part of Prime 4's marketing. So interesting one being talked about online that I wanted to weigh in with my own 2 cents on. I'm not setting all my hopes and expectations on this one, but I do think it would be very cool to see Nintendo provide us easy ways to play all of the Prime games, especially 2 and 3, in the lead up to Prime 4's release. But that's where I really want to hear from you guys at this point in the video. Do you think that there's any shot that we do have some additional Prime games headed to Nintendo Switch family of systems in the lead up to Prime 4's launch? Or do you think that that ship has sailed at this point and Nintendo's clearly just remastering Prime 1, going ahead with Prime 4's release, and basically allowing everybody else just to hook up their Wiis and GameCubes if you want to play Prime 2 and 3 in the meantime? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.